The stars looked the same as they always had, but something was wrong. Jake Morrison knew it the moment he sat down at his workstation. The numbers on his computer screen showed patterns that should not exist. Radio waves were coming from deep space, and they were not random noise. Jake worked at the Earth Defense Monitoring Station in Colorado. His job was to watch the sky for things that did not belong there. Most days were quiet. Most days space was empty and silent. Today was different. He pulled up the data again and checked his equipment. Everything worked fine. The signals were real. They came from a spot near the edge of the solar system, far beyond the last planet. Jake had been doing this job for 12 years. He had never seen anything like this. The signals had a pattern. They repeated every few seconds, like a heartbeat. Jake recorded everything and sent copies to his supervisor. Then he called Dr. Lisa Campbell. Lisa worked at the university in Denver. She studied life that might exist on other worlds. Jake had worked with her before on false alarms. This time felt different. When Lisa arrived 2 hours later, she brought Lieutenant Dan Torres from the nearby Air Force Base. The three of them sat in the dark room watching the green lines dance across the computer screens. The signals were getting stronger. Whatever was sending them was getting closer. "This is not from Earth," Lisa said after an hour of analysis. "The frequency patterns are unlike anything we use. The signal strength suggests something large." Dan, Torres had been quiet until now. "How large?" Lisa looked at the numbers again. "If I had to guess, something the size of a small city." Far out in space, Commander Vextal stood on the bridge of his ship. He was tall and thin, with gray skin and large black eyes. His people, the Zephyrians, had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. They had found many worlds with life. Most were empty of intelligent creatures, some had simple animals. A few had beings smart enough to use tools. This new world was different. The blue planet had billions of creatures living on it. They had built cities and machines. They sent signals into space and split atoms for energy. But they were still young. Their ships barely reached their own moon. "Science Officer Kethmore, what did the scans show?" Vextal asked. Kethmore was smaller than the commander, with patches of dark scales on his arms. He had studied many worlds before this one. "The planet has large amounts of water and good soil. The atmosphere can support many kinds of life. The intelligent species calls itself human." Vextal looked at the image of Earth on the main screen. It looked peaceful from space. Blue oceans, white clouds, green and brown land masses. "How many humans live there?" "Nearly 8 billion. They live in groups called nations. Each nation controls part of the planet's surface. They often fight with each other over resources and territory." This was good news for Vextal. Divided species were easier to conquer. When different groups fought among themselves, they could not work together against outside threats. The Zephyrians had conquered 12 other worlds using this same method. "What about their military strength?" Vextal asked. Kethmore touched his control panel. New images appeared on the screen. Human cities, human vehicles, human weapons. They use primitive, kinetic weapons, some chemical explosives. A few have nuclear weapons, but not many. Their space capability is limited to their local system. Vextal nodded. This was what he had expected. Young species always followed the same pattern. They discovered fire, then metal, then electricity, then nuclear power, then space travel. The humans were still early in this process. Back on Earth, Jake Morrison was not sleeping well. 3 days had passed since the first signals arrived. The patterns were more complex now. His team had grown from 3 people to 15. Military officers, scientists, and computer experts worked around the clock to understand what they were seeing. The signals were definitely artificial. They showed signs of advanced mathematics and physics. Whoever was sending them understood concepts that humans had only recently learned. More worrying, the signals were scanning Earth. They were mapping the planet's surface, studying its radio and television broadcasts, measuring its magnetic field and atmosphere. Jake stood outside the monitoring station and looked up at the night sky. Somewhere out there, something was watching his world. something with technology far beyond anything. Humans had built. Dr. Campbell joined him in the parking lot. She held a cup of coffee in both hands to keep them warm. The Colorado air was cold in October. "What do you think they want?" Jake asked. Lisa was quiet for a long moment. "In all my studies of possible alien life, I always hoped we would meet them as equals, that we could share knowledge and learn from each other. But species don't usually watch other species from hiding unless they want something. And they usually don't want to share." Back on the Zephyrian ship, Commander Vextal read the daily reports from his science teams. The humans were more interesting than he had first thought. They had created thousands of different languages and cultures. They had art and music and stories. They had explored their entire planet and were beginning to explore space. But they were also violent. The reports showed evidence of countless wars throughout their history. They had weapons that could destroy entire cities. Some of their nations spent enormous amounts of resources building bigger and more deadly weapons. This violence was typical of young species. Most grew out of it when they reached the stars. The few that did not usually destroyed themselves before they could threaten others. Vextal was not worried about human violence. His ships had energy weapons that could burn cities from orbit. His soldiers wore armor that could stop any human weapon. The Zephyrians had advantages in every area of technology. The commander made his decision. The blue planet had valuable resources. Its people could be useful as workers. The conquest would begin soon. He did not know that Jake Morrison and his team were already preparing for war. Commander Vextal wanted to know everything about the humans before his fleet moved closer to Earth. He ordered Science Officer Kethamore to send invisible probes to the planet's surface. The small devices would study human cities and watch how the species behaved during conflict. The probes launched from the Zephyrian ships like seeds scattered by wind. Each one was no bigger than a human hand, but they carried enough technology to record everything they saw and heard. They moved through space without making any sound or light that human instruments could detect. On Earth, Air Force Colonel Steve Parker was having the worst week of his career. 3 government agencies had given him the same impossible job. Find out what was sending signals from deep space. Find out what those signals meant. Find out if Earth was in danger. Do it quickly, and do it quietly. Steve worked in a building that did not appear on any public maps. His team studied threats that most people never heard about. Terrorists with stolen nuclear material, foreign spies with advanced technology, computer viruses that could shut down power grids. Now he was supposed to figure out aliens. Dr. Amy Rodriguez arrived at Steve's office on a cold Thursday morning. She was a physicist who worked for NASA, but she also helped the military understand new technologies. She carried a thick folder full of papers and photographs. "What do you have for me?" Steve asked. Amy opened the folder and spread the contents across his desk. "Radio telescope data from the last week. The signals are definitely coming from artificial sources. Multiple sources, actually. At least 5 large objects." Steve looked at the photographs. They showed radio wave patterns that looked like nothing he had ever seen. "How do you know they're artificial?" "The mathematical precision. Natural sources, like stars and planets, produce random radio noise. These signals have structured patterns. They repeat at exact intervals. They contain information." Steve nodded. He had been afraid of this answer. "What kind of information?" "That's where it gets interesting and scary." Amy pulled out another set of papers. "The signals are scans. They're mapping Earth's surface, studying our atmosphere, cataloging our radio and television broadcasts. Someone is taking pictures of our entire planet." Major Chris Johnson knocked on Steve's office door and walked in without waiting for permission. Chris ran intelligence operations for the Marine Corps. He was tall and broad with scars on his hands from his time as a combat soldier. "We have a problem," Chris said. "My teams are reporting strange equipment failures in 12 major cities. New York, Los Angeles, London, Moscow, Beijing, and others. Security cameras going offline for a few seconds. Radar systems showing brief glitches. Cell phone towers losing signal randomly." Steve felt cold despite the warm office. "When did this start?" 2 days ago. The same day the radio signals got stronger." Amy looked up from her papers. "They're not just watching us from space. They're sending something down here." The first Zephyrian probe landed in Central Park in New York City at 3 in the morning. It made no sound when it touched the ground. It produced no heat signature that human sensors could detect. It looked like a small gray rock sitting under a tree. The probe extended thin sensors that could record sound and light. It could also analyze the air and soil for chemical composition. Within minutes, it began sending data back to the Zephyrian fleet. Similar probes landed in cities around the world. They watched humans go about their daily lives. They recorded conversations and television broadcasts. They studied human technology and human behavior. What they saw puzzled the Zephyrian scientists. Humans did fight with each other, as expected. But their conflicts were limited and controlled. Most humans spent their time working, learning, or taking care of their families. They built schools and hospitals. They created art and music. They helped each other during disasters and emergencies. This was unusual for a young species. Most primitive civilizations the Zephyrians had studied spent most of their time fighting. Humans seemed to fight only when they had to. Science officer Kethmore studied the probe data in his laboratory aboard the command ship. The information was confusing. Human military technology was primitive, as expected, but human military organization was surprisingly advanced. Human soldiers trained constantly. They studied the history of warfare going back thousands of years. They practiced fighting in every possible environment, from Arctic cold to desert, heat to underwater. They prepared for enemies with better weapons and greater numbers. This level of military preparation was unusual for a species that had never faced invasion from space. Most young civilizations focused on fighting their own kind. Humans seemed to be preparing for something bigger. Back on Earth, Jake Morrison was working 18-hour days trying to decode alien signals. His team had grown to include experts from 6 countries. The world's governments were still keeping the discovery secret from their people, but they were sharing information with each other. This cooperation surprised Jake. Human nations rarely worked together so quickly on anything. The threat from space had done what decades of diplomacy could not accomplish. Dr. Lisa Campbell had moved her research to the monitoring station in Colorado. She worked with scientists from Russia, China, Britain, and other nations. They were all trying to answer the same questions. Who were the aliens? What did they want? How long did Earth have to prepare? "I've been studying their signal patterns," Lisa told Jake during a brief break. "They're systematic, methodical. They're collecting specific types of information about our planet." "What kind of information?" "Population density, military installations, industrial capacity, natural resources." It's exactly what a military force would want to know before an invasion. Lieutenant Dan Torres spent his time trying to organize Earth's defenses. This was almost impossible. Human weapons were designed to fight other humans, not aliens with advanced technology. Earth's armies could not shoot at targets in deep space. Earth's air forces could not fly in the vacuum between planets. But Dan had studied military history. He knew that weaker forces had sometimes defeated stronger ones through better planning and stronger determination. The key was making the enemy pay a high price for victory. He began writing reports about guerrilla warfare, urban combat, and resistance movements. If the aliens invaded, Earth's conventional armies would probably lose quickly, but the war would not end there. On the Zephyrian command ship, Commander Vextal was reading troubling reports from his probe teams. The humans were behaving strangely, for a species about to be conquered. Most young civilizations panicked when they detected alien signals. They either tried to hide or sent desperate messages begging for mercy. The humans were doing neither. Instead, they were preparing for war. Human military bases around the world had increased their activity levels. Soldiers were training more frequently. Weapon systems were being tested and maintained. Government leaders were meeting in secret sessions. The humans seemed to know they were being watched. More importantly, they seemed to be getting ready to fight back. Commander Vextal had conquered many worlds, but this pattern was new to him. Most species either surrendered immediately when faced with superior technology, or fought briefly before giving up. The humans appeared to be preparing for a long war. This was concerning, but not alarming. Primitive species often overestimated their chances against advanced civilizations. The Zephyrians had weapons that could destroy entire armies from orbit. Human courage would not matter against such overwhelming firepower. Vextal decided to move his fleet closer to Earth. It was time to end the observation phase and begin the conquest. The blue planet would belong to the Zephyrian Empire within days. He had no idea that the humans were already planning to make him regret that decision. Dr. Lisa Campbell could not sleep. For 2 weeks, she had been studying every piece of data about the alien signals. The answer was in the numbers somewhere, but she could not find it. The patterns were too complex, too organized. Whoever was out there had been planning this for a long time. She walked through the empty halls of the monitoring station at 2 in the morning. Most of the day shift workers had gone home hours ago. Only the essential staff remained, watching their screens for any changes in the alien signals. Jake Morrison was still at his workstation. He lived at the station now, sleeping on a cot in the break room. His wife had stopped calling after the 3rd day. She knew he could not tell her why he was not coming home. "Find anything new?" Lisa asked. Jake rubbed his eyes. The screen showed the same green lines and numbers it had shown for days. "The signals are getting more focused. They're concentrating on specific areas now. Military bases, major cities, industrial centers." Lisa felt a chill run down her back. "They're picking targets." "That's what I think too." Professor Alan Brooks arrived at the station the next morning with a truck full of books and files. He taught history at the University of Colorado, specializing in military conflicts and ancient civilizations. Colonel Steve Parker had asked him to join the research team. Alan was 60 years old with gray hair and thick glasses. He had spent his career studying how human societies responded to invasion and conquest. Now he was being asked to apply that knowledge to a threat from space. "I need to understand something," Alan said to the assembled team. "These aliens have been watching us for weeks. They have advanced technology. They could have attacked immediately. Why are they waiting?" Dr. Amy Rodriguez looked up from her computer. "Maybe they want to study us first, learn our weaknesses. Or maybe they want to minimize their own casualties," suggested Major Chris Johnson. "Even a superior force can take losses if they attack, without proper preparation." Alan nodded thoughtfully. "Both good possibilities, but there's another option. Maybe they've seen something that concerns them." General Lisa Evans arrived that afternoon. She commanded the North American Defense Command and had been given emergency authority to coordinate with military forces around the world. Lisa Evans was known for her tactical brilliance and her ability to remain calm under pressure. She listened to the team's reports without interruption. When they finished, she asked one question. "How much time do we have?" Jake Morrison answered. "Based on signal strength and movement patterns, the alien ships are getting closer. I estimate they'll reach Earth's orbit within 72 hours. "General," Evans nodded. "Then we have 3 days to prepare for the worst invasion in human history." She was wrong about the timeline. The aliens were already much closer than anyone realized. On the Zephyrian command ship, Science Officer Kethmore was studying data that made no sense. The probe reports from Earth showed a species that behaved unlike any other the Zephyrians had encountered. Humans had survived multiple extinction events in their planet's history, ice ages that should have killed them, asteroid impacts that should have destroyed their civilization, volcanic eruptions that should have ended their species. Instead of dying out, humans had adapted. They had spread to every continent on their planet. They lived in frozen wastelands and burning deserts. They built cities in swamps and on mountainsides. They had even begun to live in space. This adaptability was remarkable but not threatening. Many species were adaptable. What puzzled Kethmore was human military history. Humans had been fighting wars for their entire recorded history. They had developed tactics and strategies that no other young species had discovered. They understood concepts like guerrilla warfare, asymmetric conflict, and total war. More disturbing, humans had a pattern of fighting to the death rather than surrendering. Their history was full of battles where outnumbered forces had fought until every soldier was dead. Cities that had resisted siege for years, even when starvation and disease killed most of the population. This was not normal behavior for intelligent life. Most species valued survival over victory. They would surrender when faced with overwhelming odds. Humans seemed to have the opposite instinct. Kethmore brought his concerns to Commander Vextal. The two aliens stood in the ship's observation deck, looking at the blue planet through the transparent metal walls. "Commander, I recommend we reconsider our approach to this world," Kethmore said. Vextal was surprised. "Explain." "The humans are not behaving like other species we have conquered. They show no signs of panic or despair. Instead, they are preparing for extended resistance." Vextal looked at the data files Kethmore had prepared. "Their weapons are primitive. Their ships cannot reach our fleet. What resistance could they offer?" "That is exactly what concerns me. They know they cannot win a conventional war, yet they continue to prepare for battle. This suggests they have alternative strategies." The commander considered this. "You think they plan to fight a guerrilla war?" "I think they plan to make conquest so costly that we will abandon the effort." Vextal had heard similar warnings before. Every species they had conquered had a few individuals who claimed their people would never surrender. It was never true. When faced with orbital bombardment and superior technology, resistance always collapsed quickly. "Continue the mission as planned," Vextal ordered. "We will begin the invasion in 48 hours. Back on Earth, Jake Morrison noticed the change first. The alien signals had shifted frequency and increased in power. Whatever was out there had moved much closer to Earth. "We're out of time," he told General Evans over the secure phone line. "They'll be in orbit within hours, not days." Around the world, military bases went to full alert. Soldiers who had been training for weeks took their positions. Pilots climbed into fighter jets that they knew could not reach the alien ships. Tank crews prepared vehicles that were useless against enemies in space. It seemed hopeless, but no one talked about surrender. Captain Kelly Washington worked at the Pentagon, analyzing intercepted communications from around the world. What she found amazed her. Every major military organization on Earth was preparing for the same kind of fight. Not a conventional battle between armies. Not a quick defeat followed by occupation. They were all preparing for a war of resistance that could last for decades. Cities were being prepared for siege warfare. Supply caches were being hidden in wilderness areas. Communication networks were being hardened against attack. Civilian populations were being quietly moved away from likely targets. It was as if humanity had been planning for this moment for centuries. Lieutenant Bobby Chen worked with a team of linguists and computer programmers trying to decode alien transmissions. They had made little progress understanding the alien language, but they had learned to recognize certain patterns. The patterns were changing. The aliens were switching from observation mode to something else. The new signals were shorter and more urgent. They looked like military communications. Bobby reported his findings to Colonel Steve Parker. "Sir, I think they're about to attack." Steve had been expecting this news, but it still hit him like a physical blow. "How long do we have?" "Based on the signal changes, maybe 6 hours." Steve picked up his secure phone and began making calls. The word went out through classified channels to military commanders around the world. The invasion was about to begin, but as the news spread through the secret networks of Earth's defenders, something unexpected happened. Instead of panic, there was grim determination. Instead of despair, there was anger. Humanity had been preparing for this fight for longer than anyone realized. Every war they had ever fought had taught them something about resistance, survival, and making enemies pay dearly for victory. The aliens were about to learn why humans had survived everything their harsh planet had thrown at them. They were about to discover that some species were more dangerous when they were cornered. The Zephyrian warfleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system. 12 massive ships, each the size of a human city, arranged themselves in attack formation. Their weapons could crack continents. Their shields could stop anything humans might throw at them. Commander Vextal stood on his bridge, watching Earth grow larger on the main display screen. The blue planet looked peaceful and defenseless. Soon it would belong to the Zephyrian Empire, like the 12 other worlds they had conquered. Science Officer Kethmore, begin the final scans. Vextel ordered. Kethmore worked at his station, sending invisible sensor beams toward Earth. What he found made him pause. Commander, the humans are not behaving as expected. Explain. Most of their military forces have disappeared from our sensors. Their major cities show reduced population levels. Their communication networks have gone silent. Vextal frowned. They are hiding? It appears so. But this is not typical hiding behavior. They have not fled to remote areas or underground shelters. They have simply scattered. On Earth, the plan was working exactly as General Lisa Evans had hoped. For 3 weeks, military forces around the world had been moving to hidden positions. Soldiers had been dispersed into small groups and stationed in forests, mountains, and urban areas. Heavy weapons had been moved to concealed locations. The strategy was simple. When the aliens attacked, they would find no large targets to destroy, no massive armies to defeat, no government buildings full of leaders to capture. Instead, they would face millions of small groups, each one prepared to fight independently. Jake Morrison watched the alien ships approach on his computer screen. The monitoring station in Colorado was now empty, except for essential personnel. Most of the staff had been evacuated to safer locations. They're in orbit, he reported to General Evans over the encrypted radio link. Any sign of attack? Not yet. They're scanning the planet again. I think they're confused by what they're seeing. Dr. Lisa Campbell was hiding in a bunker beneath the University of Colorado. She had volunteered to stay behind and continue studying alien communications. If humanity survived this war, they would need to understand their enemies. The aliens were definitely confused. Their communication traffic had increased dramatically. They were sending urgent messages between their ships, trying to understand why Earth's defenses had vanished. Professor Alan Brooks sat in another bunker, surrounded by books and historical documents. He had been asked to predict how the aliens might respond to guerrilla warfare. His answer was simple. Most civilizations had no experience fighting that kind of war. Conventional military forces are trained to fight other conventional forces, he had told the planning committee. When one army defeats another army, the war ends. The aliens expect to destroy our military and accept our surrender. But that's not how this will work, Major Chris Johnson had replied. Exactly. We're not giving them an army to defeat. We're giving them a planet full of soldiers. The first alien landing ships descended from orbit 6 hours after the fleet arrived. They were smaller than the main ships, but still enormous by human standards. Each one carried 1,000 Zephyrian soldiers and enough equipment to conquer a human city. The landing ships touched down near major population centers around the world: New York, London, Moscow, Beijing, Tokyo, and others. The aliens expected to face desperate human armies defending their most important locations. Instead, they found empty cities. Colonel Steve Parker watched the landing from a hidden observation post outside Denver. The alien ship had settled in the middle of the city like a gray metal mountain. Troops in powered armor were pouring out of hatches in the ship's sides. The aliens moved in perfect formation, their weapons ready. They advanced through the empty streets, scanning for enemies. They found none. The first human attack came 3 hours later. Sergeant Maria Lopez had been a demolitions expert for 8 years. She knew how to blow up bridges, buildings, and vehicles. More importantly, she knew how to make bombs from ordinary materials. She had been hiding in the sewer system beneath downtown Denver, waiting for the aliens to establish a pattern. When she saw their patrol routes, she planted her devices and retreated to safety. The explosion destroyed an entire city block. More importantly, it killed 12 alien soldiers and damaged one of their armored vehicles. Similar attacks happened in every city where aliens had landed. Small groups of humans struck without warning, then disappeared before the aliens could respond. Snipers fired from hidden positions. Bombs exploded under alien patrols. Communication lines were cut. Each attack was small. Each attack killed only a few aliens. But there were hundreds of attacks every day. Commander Vextal watched the casualty reports with growing alarm. His forces were suffering steady losses, but they had not captured a single human prisoner. They had not found the human command structure. They had not even located the main human military forces. Science Officer Kethmore, where are their armies? Vextal demanded. Kethmore had been working on this problem for hours. Commander, I believe we misunderstood their strategy. They do not have armies in the way we understand the term. Explain. Every adult human receives some form of military training. Their civilians are taught basic combat skills. Their police forces are armed and trained like soldiers. Their military reserves outnumber their active forces by 10 to 1, Vextal stared at the tactical display. You mean the entire population is their army? That appears to be the case. This was unprecedented in Zephyrian military history. Every species they had conquered had a clear division between soldiers and civilians. Defeat the soldiers, and the civilians would surrender, but humans seemed to have no such division. Dr. Amy Rodriguez was hiding in a laboratory beneath NORAD, the underground military complex in Colorado. She was working on humanity's most desperate project, reverse engineering alien technology. The Zephyrian probes that had been studying Earth for weeks were small, but they contained advanced components. Amy's team had managed to capture 3 of the devices without alerting the aliens. What have you found? General Evans asked during a secure video conference. Their energy systems are incredibly efficient, Amy reported, but they're not impossible to understand. We think we can build weapons that can damage their equipment. How long do you need? Give us 2 weeks. The general looked tired. I don't know if we have 2 weeks. Around the world, the pattern was the same. Alien forces controlled the areas immediately around their landing sites, but they could not expand their territory. Every attempt to move into new areas met with resistance. Humans attacked from sewers and rooftops. They used improvised weapons and homemade explosives. They struck at night and disappeared before dawn. When aliens destroyed one resistance cell, 3 more took its place. Commander Vextal had conquered 12 worlds, but he had never faced anything like this. On other planets, the conquest followed a predictable pattern. Land forces, defeat, armies, capture leaders, accept surrender. The entire process usually took less than a week. On Earth, his forces had been fighting for 10 days and controlled less territory than when they started. Worse, human resistance was growing stronger, not weaker. Kethmore brought him the daily intelligence report. Commander, we have identified the source of the problem. Tell me, humans do not fight to win. They fight to inflict casualties. Every attack is designed to kill our soldiers, even if the attackers die in the process. Vextal thought about this. Suicide attacks? Not exactly. They prefer to survive when possible, but they are willing to trade their lives for ours at an exchange rate that favors them. The commander studied the casualty figures. In 10 days of fighting, the Zephyrians had lost 800 soldiers. The humans had lost approximately 3,000 fighters. In a conventional war, this would be a clear alien victory. But the humans had billions of people. The Zephyrians had brought 12,000 soldiers. At the current rate of losses, the alien invasion force would be wiped out in less than 2 months. For the first time in his career, Commander Vextal began to consider the possibility of retreat. The turning point came on the 15th day of the invasion. Commander Vextal received a message that changed everything he thought he knew about warfare. Lieutenant Bobby Chen had been working with a team of code breakers to intercept alien communications. They had finally succeeded in translating parts of the enemy language. What they learned was immediately passed to every resistance cell on Earth. The aliens were running out of soldiers. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered many worlds, but they had never needed to occupy them with large armies. Most species surrendered quickly, then accepted alien rule with minimal resistance. The Zephyrians were explorers and conquerors, not garrison troops. Earth was different. Every day brought new attacks from directions the aliens had not expected. Humans used weapons the aliens had not planned for. Kitchen knives became deadly in the hands of desperate fighters. Fertilizer became explosives. Children threw rocks with deadly accuracy. More disturbing to the aliens, humans shared information with impossible speed. When one resistance cell discovered an alien weakness, every other cell knew about it within hours. When aliens changed their tactics, humans adapted faster. Dr. Amy Rodriguez had kept her promise. Working with captured alien technology, her team had built weapons that could penetrate Zephyrian armor. The new guns were crude and dangerous to their users, but they worked. Commander Nick Anderson led the first attack using the new weapons. His team of 20 soldiers struck an alien patrol outside Chicago. When the fighting ended, 8 aliens were dead, and only 3 humans had been wounded. Word of the victory spread through the resistance networks like wildfire. Within days, similar weapons were being built in hidden workshops around the world. Science Officer Kethmore brought the latest intelligence reports to Commander Vextal. The news was worse than ever. Commander, human resistance is entering a new phase. They now possess weapons that can threaten our soldiers. More importantly, their coordination has improved dramatically. Vextal studied the tactical displays. Red markers showed locations where his forces had been attacked in the last 24 hours. There were hundreds of them. How is this possible? We destroyed their communication networks on the first day. They are using systems we did not detect. Short-range radios hidden in civilian equipment. Messages pass through underground networks. They appear to have prepared backup communication methods for exactly this situation. This level of preparation was unthinkable. Most species barely understood the concept of planetary defense. Humans had apparently spent decades preparing for invasion by a technologically superior enemy. What are our losses? Vextal asked. Kethmore hesitated. In 15 days of fighting, we have lost 2,300 soldiers. That represents 19% of our invasion force. Vextal felt cold despite the warm air on the bridge. And human losses? Difficult to estimate. They do not wear uniforms or carry identification. Intelligence suggests approximately 12,000 killed, with many more wounded. But their replacement rate appears to exceed their casualty rate. The mathematics were simple and terrifying. At the current rate of attrition, the Zephyrian invasion force would be destroyed in less than 2 months. The humans could sustain their losses for years. On Earth, Jake Morrison was coordinating intelligence from his hidden command post in the Colorado mountains. The news was better than anyone had dared hope. The aliens were retreating from several cities. Their patrols had become smaller and less frequent, most telling they had stopped trying to expand their territory. They're going defensive, General Lisa Evans observed during a secure conference call. That means they're scared, Professor Alan Brooks agreed. In military history, the point where an occupying force goes defensive is usually the beginning of their withdrawal. They've realized they can't win. Dr. Lisa Campbell had been monitoring alien communications around the clock. The pattern of messages between their ships had changed dramatically. Where before there had been confident tactical discussions, now there were urgent exchanges that seemed almost panicked. I think they're arguing among themselves, she told the command team. The communication volume has tripled, and the tone suggests disagreement. She was right. On the Zephyrian command ship, a heated debate was taking place in the War Council chambers. We must escalate, argued War Commander Thekval. Use orbital bombardment to destroy their cities, burn their forests, make the planet uninhabitable, if necessary. Science Officer Kethmore disagreed. That would defeat the purpose of conquest. We came here for resources and workers. Destroying the planet gives us nothing. Commander Vextal listened to both arguments. He had used orbital bombardment on other worlds when ground forces met unexpected resistance. But those had been small rebellions, not planet-wide resistance movements. If we destroy their cities, the survivors will scatter to the wilderness, Kethmore continued. We would face the same resistance but from an even more dispersed enemy. The war could continue for decades. The debate continued for hours. Some officers wanted to use chemical weapons to kill the humans without damaging their cities. Others suggested biological weapons that would make the population easier to control. But every suggestion faced the same problem. Humans were not fighting a conventional war that could be ended by conventional escalation. They were fighting a war of survival that would continue until every human was dead or every alien had left. Captain Kelly Washington intercepted the alien transmission that ended the debate. Her team had been improving their translation abilities every day, and this message was clear enough to understand. The Zephyrian High Command, located many light years away, had received reports about the Earth invasion. Their response was simple and devastating. No reinforcements would be sent. The invasion fleet was ordered to complete their mission with existing resources or withdraw from the system. The aliens had a choice: fight a war of attrition they could not win, or abandon their conquest and retreat to space. Commander Vextal made his decision 3 days later. The withdrawal order went out to all Zephyrian forces on Earth. They would return to their ships immediately and prepare for departure. The retreat was not easy. Human resistance forces had spent weeks learning alien patrol routes and defensive positions. When the aliens tried to return to their landing ships, they faced constant attacks. Sergeant Maria Lopez led the final assault on the Denver landing site. Her team of demolition experts had spent 2 days placing explosives around the alien ship. When the retreat began, they triggered the charges. The explosion did not destroy the ship, but it damaged the engines badly enough that the vessel could barely reach orbit. Similar attacks occurred at landing sites around the world. Of the 12 Zephyrian ships that had arrived at Earth, 2 were too damaged to travel between stars. Their crews were evacuated to other vessels, and the damaged ships were abandoned in Earth orbit. Jake Morrison watched the alien fleet depart on his monitoring equipment. The radio signals grew weaker as the ships moved away from Earth. Within hours, they had jumped to faster-than-light travel and vanished from human detection. The war was over. Humanity had won. But the victory came with a price. Nearly 20,000 humans had died fighting the aliens. Entire city blocks had been destroyed. The global economy was in chaos from weeks of warfare. None of that mattered to the survivors. Earth remained free. Dr. Amy Rodriguez led the team that studied the abandoned alien ships in orbit. The technology they recovered would advance human science by centuries. More importantly, the ships contained star maps showing the locations of other Zephyrian colonies. Humanity now knew they were not alone in the universe. They also knew that some neighbors were hostile. The preparations for the next war began. Immediately, Commander Vextal filed his final report about Earth when his fleet reached the next star system. His recommendation was simple: avoid the Sol system at all costs. The species on the third planet is unsuitable for conquest, he wrote. They possess a level of military preparation and fighting determination that makes occupation impossible with conventional forces. Recommend quarantine status for the entire system. The report was distributed to every Zephyrian fleet commander and stored in the Central Military Archives. Within months, similar reports came from other alien civilizations that had considered investigating the small blue planet. Earth's reputation spread through the galaxy. The humans were a species that could not be conquered. They were too well prepared, too determined, and too dangerous to their enemies. The galaxy was a large place, with millions of worlds and hundreds of intelligent species. Most of them were peaceful, some were hostile. A few were predatory, and now all of them knew about Earth. They knew about the humans who had looked at an invasion fleet and decided to fight rather than surrender. They knew about a species that prepared for war even in peacetime and treated their own deaths as acceptable. Costs for victory. The humans had passed their first test as a spacefaring civilization. They had proven they could defend their home world against superior enemies. But the real test was just beginning. Earth was no longer hidden in the depths of space. The galaxy knew humanity existed, and some civilizations would see that as a threat that needed to be eliminated. The next invasion would be larger, better prepared, and led by enemies who understood what they were facing: humanity woe.